Roaring Twenties. A name that evokes images of flapper dresses, jazz music, and exuberant parties. It was a decade of dramatic change and unparalleled prosperity in America. The devastation of World War I was behind them. A new era of peace and progress seemed to dawn. The United States emerged from the war as a global power. Its economy was booming. New industries were emerging. Technologies like the radio and the automobile were transforming everyday life. Americans were eager to embrace this newfound prosperity. Cities grew at an astonishing rate. Skyscrapers, symbols of modernity, pierced the sky. Farmers flocked to urban centers in search of work and opportunity. The American dream seemed within reach for many. But this era of exuberance also masked underlying tensions and inequalities that would eventually come to the fore. At the heart of the Roaring Twenties was a period of remarkable economic growth. The war had spurred technological advancements and industrial production. This continued into the post-war years. Mass production techniques pioneered by Henry Ford made goods cheaper and more accessible. The automobile became a symbol of the age. It transformed transportation and opened up new possibilities for travel and leisure. Other industries, such as radio manufacturing and consumer appliances, also flourished. This economic boom was fueled by easy credit and a surging stock market. Americans, eager to participate in the prosperity, invested heavily in stocks. The stock market became a symbol of the nation's boundless optimism, but as we shall see, this rapid growth was not sustainable. The seeds of economic instability were being sown even as the good times rolled. The Roaring Twenties was a time of great cultural ferment. Jazz music, with its improvisational spirit and infectious rhythms, became the soundtrack of the age. Originating in the African-American communities of New Orleans, jazz spread rapidly across the country. It found a home in the nightclubs and dance halls of major cities. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington became stars. Their music transcended racial barriers. It captured the energy and excitement of the era. Another important cultural movement was the Harlem Renaissance. Centered in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City, the Harlem Renaissance was a flowering of African-American art, literature, and music. Writers like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston gave voice to the experiences of Black Americans. Their work challenged racial prejudices and celebrated Black identity. The Roaring Twenties witnessed significant social changes, particularly for women. The 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, was passed in 1920. This was a landmark achievement for women's suffrage. It marked a turning point in the struggle for women's rights. Women were entering the workforce in greater numbers. They were challenging traditional gender roles. The image of the new woman emerged. Independent, stylish, and assertive, the new woman embraced new freedoms. Flappers, with their bobbed hair, short skirts, and love of dancing, became a symbol of the changing times. They challenged societal norms and embraced a more liberated lifestyle. However, these changes were not without their critics. Traditionalists viewed these social shifts with alarm. They saw them as a threat to traditional values. Section 5. The Experiment of Prohibition. In 1920, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution went into effect. It prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol. Prohibition, as it was known, was intended to curb social ills associated with alcohol consumption. However, it had the unintended consequence of fueling organized crime. With legal sources of alcohol cut off, a black market flourished. Speakeasies, hidden bars and nightclubs, sprang up in cities across the country. They provided illegal liquor to thirsty patrons. Bootleggers, those who smuggled and sold illegal alcohol, became wealthy and powerful. Organized crime syndicates, led by figures like Al Capone, gained control of the lucrative bootlegging trade. Prohibition proved difficult to enforce. It led to widespread corruption and violence. Section 6. The Rise of Organized Crime. The Prohibition era provided fertile ground for the rise of organized crime in America. With the enormous profits to be made from bootlegging, criminal gangs flourished. They expanded their operations into other illicit activities, such as gambling and prostitution. Al Capone, the notorious gangster who ruled Chicago with an iron fist, became a symbol of the lawlessness of the age. Capone and his rivals engaged in bloody turf wars. They terrorized citizens and corrupted law enforcement officials. The violence and corruption associated with Prohibition gradually turned public opinion against it. By the end of the decade, there was a growing movement for its repeal. Prohibition was finally repealed in 1933. It is now widely regarded as a failed experiment. Section 7. Excess and speculation. Beneath the surface of prosperity and exuberance, the Roaring Twenties was marked by growing economic inequality. While the wealthy amassed fortunes, many Americans struggled to make ends meet. Farmers, in particular, faced declining incomes and rising debt. The stock market, fueled by speculation and easy credit, continued its dizzying ascent. Many Americans poured their savings into stocks, hoping to get rich quickly. However, this speculative frenzy was detached from the realities of the economy. Warning signs were ignored. The Federal Reserve, concerned about the rapid expansion of credit, raised interest rates in 1928. This move, intended to cool down the economy, had the unintended consequence of making it more difficult for businesses to borrow money. The economic boom was about to come to a crashing halt. Section 8. The Crash of '29. On October 24, 1929, the stock market crashed. Panicked investors rushed to sell their shares, but there were few buyers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, a key indicator of stock market performance, plummeted. It lost almost 13% of its value on that single day. The crash of 1929 marked the end of the Roaring Twenties. It ushered in the Great Depression, the worst economic downturn in modern history. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and millions of Americans lost their jobs and their homes. The causes of the Great Depression were complex. They included overproduction, declining consumer demand, and a global economic slowdown. The stock market crash exposed underlying weaknesses in the economy. It accelerated the downward spiral. Section 9. The Great Depression. The Great Depression had a profound impact on American society. Unemployment soared to unprecedented levels, reaching 25% by 1933. Breadlines, where people waited for hours to receive food handouts, became a common sight. Families were torn apart as men traveled the country in search of work. Many people lost their homes and farms. They were forced to live in shanty towns, derisively known as Hoovervilles, after President Herbert Hoover. The Dust Bowl, a severe drought that devastated the Great Plains in the 1930s, added to the misery. Farmers, already struggling with low crop prices, saw their livelihoods destroyed by dust storms that blackened the sky and turned day into night. Section 10. A Generation Scarred. The Great Depression left a lasting scar on American society. It shattered the dreams of millions and tested the nation's resilience. The experience of poverty and hardship shaped the values and beliefs of a generation. The government's response to the crisis was initially slow and inadequate. President Hoover, a believer in limited government intervention, resisted calls for large-scale federal relief programs. It was not until Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office in 1933 that the government began to take decisive action. Roosevelt's New Deal programs provided jobs, relief, and economic reform. They helped to alleviate the worst effects of the Depression. However, it took years for the economy to fully recover. Section 11. A Legacy of Change. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression were two sides of the same coin. The exuberance and prosperity of the 1920s masked underlying economic imbalances. The crash of 1929 and the ensuing Depression exposed these weaknesses. The era left a lasting legacy on American society. It led to a more active role for government in regulating the economy. It spurred the growth of social welfare programs. The experiences of the Depression also shaped the values of a generation. It instilled a sense of resilience and a belief in the importance of social responsibility. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression serve as a reminder that economic booms can be fleeting. They highlight the importance of addressing social and economic inequalities. These lessons remain relevant today as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century.